Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. It is here. Well, almost here. On Monday, Republicans will cast their ballots in the Iowa caucuses. It will be the first time since the January 6th insurrection the voters will see Donald Trump's name on the ballot. And a whole lot of those voters are going to support him. They're going to say, yeah, yep, we want the guy that tried to steal the last election and is now facing years in prison for doing it. There's already been a very weird campaign for a lot of reasons. I mean, we started with a huge field of candidates, remember that? And most of them have either dropped out or just faded into the background before the votes are cast. Like, they got winnowed out fast. And when they are cast in 3 days, voters will be braving snow and sub-zero temperatures in what is expected to be the coldest caucuses ever, which is saying something because there's been a lot of cold caucuses. Despite the cold, leading challengers Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis are dutifully trudging across the state trying to drum up support. They will most likely still lose, if polling is any indication, that we don't know. They could lose by a historic margin to a frontrunner who, let's be clear, has spent more time in court attending his civil fraud trial this week than he has in the state of Iowa. And even if now it feels inevitable that we would come to this, it was not inevitable. It really wasn't. There was a time in winter 2021, after January 6th, when Donald Trump was being impeached for inciting the Capitol insurrection, his approval rating hit an all-time low. It looked like he could very well be sent into a sort of permanent political exile. And then he sort of came back, and then the 2022 midterms, the elections worked out poorly for most Trump-endorsed candidates. He backed losers in a ton of winnable races, and there seemed to be a dawning awareness in the Republican Party that he was politically toxic. And 2024 could be a wide-open race for Republicans. All those folks got in because they thought he was beatable. Not now. Now Trump is polling at 54%, more than 30 points ahead of Haley, his closest challenger. It is not even close enough to say it's not even close. Of course, the only poll that matters is the one on Election Day, as we like to say here. But there's already a lot of discussion about sort of how we got here, right, on the threshold of this moment. And there's a lot of factors that have brought us to this point in which Trump is, leading by 30 or 40 points. There is the terrible, truly almost historically terrible campaign of Ron DeSantis, who once looked like a formidable challenger. There's the growing desire in the Republican electorate for authoritarian politics. And that's fueled by this ever sort of radicalizing conservative media industry. There is, of course, the complete personal cowardice of Republican leaders who could have voted to convict Trump during impeachment. We wouldn't have this problem, but who've also run interference for Trump all along. So all of those factors are here. But there is one factor on the eve of this first contest. There's one factor I think does not get enough play, and that's the tools of mob menace, the coercion, the threats of violence the Trump and MAGA movements employ that are constantly shaping the space in which the race is itself contested. I talked yesterday about this, about the bomb threat at the home of the judge in Trump's civil trial and how it was not an isolated incident and it wasn't just business as usual. From the MAGA bomber to the Cincinnati FBI shooter, remember that? Guy that showed up at the FBI after the indictments? The death threats, the fake emergency calls against investigators and prosecutors, just a few in the past week, judges, election officials. There has just been a constant stream of threats of violence and actual attempts at violence against people that have tried to hold Donald Trump to account. The intimidation hangs over all of his endeavors, is a big part of his strength. But the place where this kind of politics is the most effective, the most acutely present, is within Republican Party circles. Because for people who exist in that world, inside the Republican Party, inside professional conservative politics, the harassment and threat of violence is much, much more intimate.
There were members who told me that they were afraid for their own security, afraid, in some instances for their lives.
I have colleagues who are now traveling with armed escorts out of the fear for their safety. Many of us are altering our routines, working to get body armor. Our expectation is that someone may try to kill us.
The threats are constant. They've increased. I even heard a voicemail just this morning that we got last night threatening execution. That's kind of seems to be the normal thing nowadays, was just threaten execution.
Again, that all happened not a long time ago. It's regrettably easy to forget now that Republicans who voted to impeach or convict Trump they thought at least, and I think credibly, kind of putting their lives at risk, at least their family safety and themselves. Certainly their peace of mind was put at risk. I mean, do you remember this? We just learned this a few months ago. Senator Mitt Romney revealed that he had to spend $5,000 a day on protective security after January 6th. In fact, as he later revealed to Atlantic reporter McKay Coppins in a biography of Romney, A Reckoning, one Republican congressman confided to Romney he wanted to vote for Trump's second impeachment, but chose not to out of fear for his family's safety. And when one senator, a member of leadership, said he was leaning towards voting to convict, the others urged him to reconsider. You can't do that, Romney recalled someone saying. Think of your personal safety, said another. Think of your children. The senator eventually decided they were right. And this extends past people that are at the upper echelons of political power, past politicians or public officials. More than just they have been subjected to this mob intimidation. I mean, election officials and even like writers, just people with opinions. Conservative writer and Trump critic David French has recounted how they went after him.
In individual calls, he said, I'm sorry, but I've been asked by the Trump campaign to make sure that, David knows that this will be really, really bad for him. The assaults on my family have been overwhelming just as a writer. I have a multiracial family, and so they have gone after my youngest daughter in the worst way imaginable.
That was back in 2016. Today, French, who's still conservative, staunchly conservative, and also staunchly anti-Trump, wrote in the New York Times that things are even worse. Quote, 8 years of bitter experience have taught us that supporting Trump degrades the character of his core supporters. Never before have I seen extremism penetrate a vast American community so deeply, so completely, and so comprehensively. And I'm going to tell you, this is all stuff that's sort of on the record and documented. For every example of this, there is stuff not on the record that people discuss about their security situation, which they can't talk about publicly for obvious reasons, that anytime they're in the crosshairs, they're dealing with a security issue, cautious of Trump. And that's particularly true for people whose life is Republican Party politics, whose constituents are conservatives and neighbors who are Trump devotees. This extremism, this acceptance of coercion, of political violence or the threat thereof, of terror, of just insane harassment as a tactic, it's really powerful. I think it's fair to say, I really believe this, that it has completely subverted the ability of the Republican Party themselves to genuinely run a free and fair election within their own party to choose their own nominee. Because not only is there this ever-present threat, everyone in the upper echelons of the party also understands that Donald Trump will never accept defeat. I mean, you're having a contest with a guy who, is he going to accept defeat? They understand it because of January 6th, but they understand it before that. They understand it because of 2016, when Trump lost the Iowa caucuses and he reportedly pressured state Republicans to invalidate the results. Does that sound familiar? He ran around afterwards saying it was rigged. So just take a second to imagine what it would look like if Nikki Haley or someone else actually were to start beating Donald Trump for the nomination this year. If we started seeing some surprises, right? And that has happened before in American politics. It's just almost impossible not to imagine a situation in which you end up with a scene that looks like January 6th outside the Republican National Convention. Right? Like, if Trump starts losing, what's going to happen? Play that out. They all have. They all understand what they're dealing with. It is under those conditions. Those are the conditions under which we are having this contest, this election for the Republican nominee. Whatever happens on Monday in Iowa and later in New Hampshire and in South Carolina and Super Tuesday, you just cannot separate Trump's performance from these ever-present, deeply ominous, anti-democratic threats of harassment and violence. It's just a central part of what Donald Trump stands for, or how he and his movement pursue political power.